This is a story of a woman, a widow who loves her son very much. The woman's name was Eleanor and the son's name was Julian. Eleanor was a mother who gave everything for her only child. Her son Julian was her whole world, the center of her universe. But soon he would look at his own mother in the eyes and say words that would shatter her heart into a million pieces. Eleanor was 65 years old. She lived in a small, neat house on a quiet street in Riverdale. The house was always clean, and it always smelled of pine polish and something good baking in the oven. Eleanor was a simple woman. She did not have much money, but she had a heart full of love, and all of that love was for her son, Julian. Her husband had passed away when Julian was just a little boy. Eleanor had to be both a mother and a father. She worked hard, very, very hard. In the morning, she cleaned offices downtown. She would wake up before the sun when the streets were still dark and quiet. She would scrub floors and polish desks until her back ached. In the afternoon, she worked as a cashier at the neighborhood grocery store. She would stand for hours smiling at customers, even when her feet were tired and swollen. Sometimes on the weekends, she would take on a third job, mending clothes for people in her community. Her hands showed her life story. They were not soft and smooth. They were rough with calluses on the palms and little nicks on the knuckles. Her face also showed her years of hard work. There were lines around her eyes from squinting in the early morning sun, and lines around her mouth from a lifetime of smiling through her struggles. Near her left eye, there was a small, pale scar, a faint line that most people didn't even notice. But to Eleanor, it was a reminder of a long-ago day filled with smoke and fear. Everything she did, every dollar she earned was for Julian. She wanted him to have a better life than she did. She sent him to the best school she could afford. She made sure he always had new clothes, even if her own coat was old and thin. When he wanted to join the school's soccer team, she worked extra shifts to buy him the best cleats. When he wanted to go to college, she took out a loan, promising herself she would pay back every single penny just to see her son succeed. And he did succeed. Julian grew up to be a handsome and smart young man. He went to a good university and got a job in a big company in the city. He wore expensive suits and drove a nice car. Eleanor was so proud of him. Her heart would swell with joy whenever he came to visit. She would cook all his favorite foods, steamed fish, rice and peas, and her special plantain pudding. They would sit at her small kitchen table, and he would tell her about his work, and she would listen, her eyes shining with pride. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Julian came to visit. But this time, he was not alone. He brought a young woman with him. Her name was Victoria. Victoria was very beautiful, like a model from a magazine. She wore a bright red dress and shiny silver jewelry. Her nails were long and perfectly manicured. When she walked into Eleanor's small, simple house, she looked around as if she had never seen such a place before. "Mom," Julian said, his voice full of excitement. "This is Victoria, my fiancée. We are getting married." Eleanor's heart leaped with joy. A wedding. Her son was getting married. This was the day she had been dreaming of for so long. She felt tears well up in her eyes. Happy tears. She rushed forward and hugged Julian tightly. "Oh, my son, I am so happy for you. So happy." Then she turned to Victoria and opened her arms for a hug. "Welcome to the family, my dear," she said, her voice warm and kind. Victoria did not step forward. She gave a small, tight smile and allowed Eleanor to give her a quick, awkward hug. Victoria's dress felt stiff, and she smelled of expensive perfume that was too strong for the small living room. Eleanor didn't mind. She was too happy to notice. She pulled away, clapping her hands together. "Oh, we must celebrate. I will make a pot of tea and I have a cake I baked this morning." They all sat in the living room. Eleanor brought out the tea and cake on her best tray. She could not stop smiling. She asked them about their plans. When was the wedding? Where would it be? She was already imagining it. She would wear her green velvet dress, the one she had saved for a special occasion. She would sit in the front row crying happy tears as her son, her wonderful son, got married. It's going to be a very big wedding, Mom, Julian said. Victoria's family. They are very wealthy. They have a lot of important friends. Oh, that is wonderful, son. Eleanor said, beaming. I can't wait to meet them. Victoria took a small, delicate sip of her tea. She looked at Julian. Then she looked at Eleanor. Her eyes traveled from Eleanor's simple dress to her work-worn hands holding the teacup. She looked at Eleanor's kind, wrinkled face. There was a look in Victoria's eyes that Eleanor did not understand. It was cold. Julian cleared his throat. He looked nervous. He kept looking at Victoria and then back at his mother. The happy energy in the room started to fade. It was replaced by a strange silence. Mom, Julian began, his voice much quieter now. We need to talk to you about something. About the wedding? Yes, my son. What is it? Eleanor asked, her smile starting to feel a little stiff. Julian fidgeted with his car keys on the coffee table. He would not look at her. Well, Victoria and we've been talking, and we think it might be better if you... He stopped. He couldn't seem to say the words. Victoria placed her hand on his arm. She gave him a little nod as if encouraging him. Then she looked at Eleanor and her smile was gone. What we mean, Victoria said, her voice sharp and clear, is that this is a very high-profile event. The guest list is full of important people. Appearances are very important to my family and to us. Eleanor looked from Victoria to her son. She was confused. I don't understand. What do you mean? Julian finally looked up. His eyes were full of something Eleanor had never seen before. Shame. But it was not shame for himself. It was shame for her. Mom, he said, the words coming out in a rush. We don't want you to come to the wedding. The air in the room stood still. The sound of the ticking clock on the wall suddenly seemed very loud. Eleanor felt as if all the air had been punched out of her lungs. What? What did you say, Julian? Not come to my own son's wedding? Why? Julian's face turned red. He looked down at the floor. Mom, please don't make this difficult. It's just... Look at you. Look at me. Your face, he stammered. And your hands, you look so old and tired. My friends, Victoria's family. They won't understand. You would be an embarrassment, Victoria added, her voice like ice. We want everything to be perfect. Your presence would just be out of place. The words hit Eleanor like stones. An embarrassment, out of place. Her son, her Julian, the baby she had held in her arms, the boy she had worked her fingers to the bone for, was telling her she was too ugly for his wedding. He was ashamed of the very hands that had fed him, the very face that had smiled at him every day of his life. She did not cry. She did not shout. A strange calm washed over her, a deep, cold, quiet in her heart. She looked at her son, really looked at him. She saw the expensive suit, the shiny watch, the confident man she had helped create, but she no longer saw the little boy she loved. She saw a stranger. She slowly stood up. Her movements were steady. She looked at Julian and then at Victoria. She did not say a word. She simply nodded. It was a slow, deliberate nod. Okay, she said. Her voice was flat, without any emotion. Okay, Julian. Julian looked relieved. He quickly stood up. Thank you for understanding, Mom. It's for the best. We'll send you pictures. Lots of pictures. He and Victoria walked to the door, eager to leave. They left the half-eaten cake and the full teacups on the table. As they walked out, neither of them looked back. Eleanor stood alone in her quiet living room. She walked to the small mirror hanging on the wall. She looked at her reflection. She saw the lines. She saw the tired eyes. She saw the rough hand she held up to her face, and she saw the small, pale scar near her eye. As she traced the scar with her finger, a memory from long ago flickered in her mind, a memory of smoke so thick it was hard to breathe. The sound of a fire crackling and a little boy crying in fear. She remembered a promise she had made to herself in that moment of terror. A promise about protecting her son, no matter the cost. A single tear finally rolled down her cheek. But it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of decision. Her son wanted a perfect, beautiful wedding free of his embarrassing, ugly mother. She would let him have it. He would smile and laugh on his special day. But she knew something he did not. He would soon learn that a mother's sacrifice and a mother's pain came with a price he never, ever imagined he would have to pay. The front door clicked shut, leaving a silence in the house that was heavier than any sound. Eleanor stood in the middle of her living room for a long time. The half-eaten cake and the fancy teacup sat on the table, a sad monument to a celebration that had died. She did not cry anymore. The single tear had been enough. Now her heart was filled with a quiet, solid resolve, like a stone settling at the bottom of a still lake. She walked slowly through her home. It was a house built on sacrifice. She looked at the sturdy sofa. She had worked 3 weeks of overtime at the grocery store to buy it so Julian would have a comfortable place to sit when he visited. She touched the frame of his graduation picture on the wall. The price of that frame had been her lunch money for a month. She had eaten nothing but crackers and water so she could buy it for him. Every object, every corner held a memory of her love and her labor. Now they felt like relics of a life that was over. He was ashamed of her. He had looked at the face of his mother and seen only ugliness. The next morning was Monday. Eleanor woke up even earlier than usual. She did not put on her cleaning uniform or her cashier's vest. Instead, she went to the old wooden wardrobe in her bedroom and took out her Sunday best. It was a simple but elegant navy blue dress, the one she wore to church. She put on her good, comfortable shoes and a string of her late husband's pearls. She looked at herself in the mirror. She saw the lines, the tired eyes, the scar. But today she did not see ugliness. She saw strength. She saw a woman who had survived. Her first stop was the downtown bank. It was a large old building with marble floors that clicked under her shoes. She did not go to the regular teller line. She walked straight to the polished wooden door that said, "Mr. Davies, Bank Manager." She knocked softly. A kind-looking man with gray hair opened the door. "Eleanor. Good morning. It's a surprise to see you so early. Is everything all right?" Mr. Davies had known her for over 20 years. He knew how hard she worked. He had helped her with the loan for Julian's college education, and he had seen her pay it back month after month without ever being late. "Everything is fine," Eleanor said, her voice calm and steady. "I need to make some changes to my accounts." They sat down at his big desk. Mr. Davies pulled up her files on his computer screen. "All right, Eleanor. What can I do for you?" "I have a joint savings account with my son, Julian," she began. "All of the money in that account is money that I have put in. I would like to close that account and move all of the funds into a new account under my name only." Mr. Davies raised his eyebrows. This was the account Eleanor called Julian's future. She had been putting money into it for years. "Are you sure, Eleanor? That's a significant amount of money. Is Julian aware of this?" "I am sure," she said firmly. "My son is a grown man now. He has a good job. He no longer needs my help." Next, she looked him in the eye. My son also has a credit card that is linked to my main account. He uses it for his expenses. I want you to cancel that card immediately. Today. Mr. Davies looked worried. Eleanor. I have to be honest. The balance on that card is very high. Your son has been spending quite a lot. A fancy dinner last week, a new watch the month before. Eleanor's face did not change. Yes, I know. I have seen the bills. Please cancel the card. There was one last thing. The apartment he lives in, she said. I am the co-signer on the lease and the rent is paid automatically from my account every month. I want to stop those payments. The next payment is due in 2 weeks. It will not be coming from me. Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair. He could see the deep hurt behind her calm expression. He had seen her come into the bank tired and worn out after a long day's work to deposit her small earnings. He knew every dollar in those accounts was soaked in her sweat and sacrifice. He did not ask any more questions. He simply nodded. I will take care of everything for you right now, Eleanor. When she left the bank, Eleanor felt lighter. It was a strange feeling. A part of her life was over and it hurt, but it was also a relief. Her next stop was a small law office a few blocks away. Mr. Henderson was a lawyer, a kind man who had helped her write her will a few years ago. He was surprised to see her. Eleanor, please come in, he said, ushering her into his office, which smelled of old books and coffee. What can I do for you? I need to change my will, she said simply, sitting in the chair opposite his desk. Of course, he said, pulling out her file. What changes would you like to make? He looked down at the document. Currently, everything, the house, your savings, your life insurance. It all goes to your son, Julian. That is what I want to change, Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. I want to remove my son from my will completely. He will receive nothing. Not the house, not a single penny. Mr. Henderson put down his pen and looked at her over his glasses. Eleanor. This is a very serious step. May I ask what has happened? Eleanor looked down at her hands. The hands her son was so ashamed of. For the first time, she decided to tell someone the full story. She told him about Julian and Victoria's visit. She told him their words. He said I was an embarrassment. He said my face was too ugly for his wedding. Mr. Henderson listened without interrupting. His expression grew sad and then angry on her behalf. I am so sorry, Eleanor. No mother should ever hear those words from her child. It is more than that, Eleanor said softly. She reached up and lightly touched the small pale scar near her eye. Does my face look ugly to you, Mr. Henderson? Of course not, Eleanor. You have a kind face. My son thinks it does, she said. He has forgotten how I got this scar. He was only 5 years old. Our old apartment, the one we lived in after his father passed. There was a fire. It started in the kitchen. The smoke was so thick I could not see. I grabbed him from his bed, but a piece of the ceiling, a hot burning piece of wood, fell down between us and the door. Her voice was still quiet, but it was filled with the memory of that terrible night. I had to get him out. There was no other way. I put him behind me. I covered his little body with my own, and I pushed my way through the flames. The heat was terrible. A burning piece of the door frame fell and hit me here, she said, pointing to her cheek. It burned my face, but I got him out. I saved my son's life that day. She looked up at Mr. Henderson and now there were tears in her eyes. This scar, this ugly face that he is so ashamed of, is the reason he is alive. The hands that he thinks are so rough and horrible are the hands that pulled him from a fire and he has forgotten. He looks at me and sees an ugly old woman who will embarrass him at his fancy wedding. Mr. Henderson was speechless. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are one of the strongest women I have ever met." He turned back to the will. "What do you want to do with your estate?" "I want to leave it all to the Children's Aid Society," she said. "All of it. Let it help children who are really suffering. Let it help their parents." The new will was drawn up and signed. As she left the lawyer's office, the sun was high in the sky. The wedding was in 3 days. Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace. She had done what she had to do. In another part of the city, Julian and Victoria were at a fancy restaurant finalizing their honeymoon plans. They were laughing and holding hands. "I'm so glad we had that talk with my mother," Julian said, sipping his expensive wine. "It would have been so awkward having her there. She just doesn't fit into our world." "You did the right thing, honey," Victoria said, admiring her large diamond ring. "It's our day. It should be perfect." Julian paid for the meal with the credit card his mother had just cancelled. He had no idea it was the last time it would ever work. On the day of the wedding, Eleanor did not stay home and cry. She put on her navy blue dress and went to church. She sat in her usual pew and prayed. She prayed for strength. She prayed for peace. And she prayed for the little boys she had lost. When the service was over, she spent the afternoon volunteering in the church kitchen, helping prepare meals for the homeless. Her rough hands were busy and her heart was calm. Miles away, Julian stood at the altar in his tuxedo, a big, happy smile on his face. Victoria walked down the aisle looking like a princess. It was a beautiful, expensive wedding. Everyone was beautiful. Everything was perfect, just as he wanted. He smiled for the cameras, surrounded by his new important family. He did not think of his mother once. He was smiling, but he did not know that his life as he knew it was about to end. And this would be the last day he would have a reason to smile for a very, very long time. The honeymoon was as perfect as money could buy. Julian and Victoria flew to a beautiful island where the sand was as white as sugar and the water was a brilliant clear blue. They stayed in a luxurious resort with a private balcony that looked out over the ocean. For a few days, they lived in a dream. They ordered expensive champagne, ate delicious food at fancy restaurants, and shopped at high-end boutiques. Julian felt like a king. He was a successful man with a beautiful wife. His old life and his simple mother felt a million miles away. The dream came to an end on their last night. They had just finished a spectacular 7-course meal at the hotel's most exclusive restaurant. The bill arrived on a small silver tray. It was very expensive, but Julian didn't care. He was living the good life. He confidently pulled out his shiny credit card, the one linked to his mother's account, and handed it to the waiter. He and Victoria were laughing about something when the waiter returned to their table. The waiter's face was apologetic. "I'm very sorry, sir," he said quietly. "The card has been declined." Julian stopped laughing. "What? That's impossible. Try it again." "I have tried it 3 times, sir," the waiter said, looking embarrassed. "It says the card has been cancelled." "Cancelled?" Julian said, his voice rising slightly. "That's ridiculous. It's a mistake." He felt a flush of heat on his face. Victoria was staring at him, her perfect smile gone. People at the nearby tables were starting to look over. "Do you have another form of payment, sir?" the waiter asked. Julian fumbled for his wallet. He had his own debit card, but he knew there wasn't nearly enough money in that account to cover this bill. He had always relied on his mother's account for big expenses like this. He gave the waiter his debit card, praying it would work. It was declined, too. Now, real panic started to set in. The manager was called. There was a quiet, humiliating discussion. Julian had to promise to wire the money from his bank as soon as he returned home. They left the restaurant in shame, walking through the beautiful candlelit resort with their heads down. The magic was gone. What was that, Julian? Victoria demanded as soon as they were back in their room. Her voice was sharp. You told me you were a successful man. You can't even pay for a dinner. It's just a bank error, honey, he said, trying to sound confident. I'll sort it out in the morning. But the next morning, when he called the bank, the news was worse. A polite woman on the phone told him, I'm sorry, Mr. Julian, but that credit card was permanently cancelled last week. Cancelled? By who? I didn't cancel it, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. There was a pause and the sound of typing. It was cancelled by the primary account holder, a Mrs. Eleanor. Julian's blood ran cold. His mother. Why would she do that? He thought back to their last conversation. She had been so quiet, so calm. He had thought she understood. Now he realized it was not understanding. It was something else, something he could not name. A cold fury began to build inside him. How dare she? How dare she embarrass him like this? The rest of the trip back home was tense and silent. Victoria sat beside him on the plane, looking out the window, a wall of ice between them. When they arrived back in the city, tired and angry, they took a taxi to Julian's apartment. It was the place his mother had co-signed for, the place where the rent was paid from her account like clockwork. As they walked up to his door, he saw a piece of paper taped to it. It was a bright orange notice. He pulled it off and read it. His heart pounded in his chest. It was an eviction notice. The rent for the month had not been paid. The notice said he had 3 days to pay the full amount plus late fees or he would be locked out. What is that? Victoria asked, her voice flat. Julian couldn't speak. He just handed her the paper. She read it and her face, which was already cold, turned to stone. Eviction? You're being evicted? I thought you owned this place. I. My mother pays the rent, he stammered. The word sounded pathetic even to his own ears. Your mother pays your rent? Victoria said, her voice dripping with disgust. The old woman you were too embarrassed to have at our wedding? That's who has been paying for this big, successful life of yours. Julian felt like a child who had been caught in a lie. She was supposed to. She always. Take me home, Julian, Victoria said, turning away from him. Take me back to my parents' house. I need to think. Victoria, wait. We can fix this. He pleaded. Fix it then, Julian, she said without looking back. You're a grown man. Fix it. He drove her to her parents' mansion in a grim silence. When she got out of the car, she didn't say goodbye. She just slammed the door. Desperate and terrified, Julian drove straight to the one place he knew he could get answers. He sped through the streets, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, and screeched to a halt in front of his mother's small, neat house. He pounded on the door. Eleanor opened it. She was wearing a simple apron and holding a dish towel. She looked calm. She did not look surprised to see him. What did you do? He yelled, not even waiting for her to speak. You cancelled my card. You stopped paying my rent. You ruined my honeymoon. You're trying to ruin my life. Eleanor looked at him. Her eyes were not angry. They were just clear. The credit card was mine, Julian, she said, her voice soft but firm. The bank account the rent was paid from was mine. It was my money. I decided to stop spending it. But why? He demanded. After everything I've done to become successful, why would you do this to me? Eleanor did not raise her voice. Everything you've done. Or everything I've done for you. Julian, you are a 30-year-old man. You are married now. A husband should be able to pay for his own dinner. He should be able to pay for his own home. But I can't, he cried out. The anger in his voice now mixed with a whining desperation. I don't have that kind of money. You know that. You have to fix this, Mom. You have to call the landlord. You have to turn my card back on. No, she said. It was a simple, quiet word, but it hit him with the force of a physical blow. What do you mean, no? He whispered, his rage collapsing into disbelief. I mean no, she repeated. She looked at him and for the first time he saw not just a tired old woman but someone with a will as strong as steel. You are ashamed of me, son. You are ashamed of my face and my hands, but you are not ashamed of my money. You cannot have one without the other. My money comes from these hands. This home, your education, your apartment. It was all built by this ugly old woman. Since you do not want the woman, you can no longer have her money. He stared at her, speechless. All his life, whenever he was in trouble, his mother had been his safety net. She had always been there to catch him, to fix things, to make it all better. He had pushed her and pushed her, always knowing she would be there. Now, for the first time, he had pushed too far. The net was gone. He saw the finality in her eyes. There was no argument he could make. There was no apology he could offer that would change her mind. He had broken something between them and it could not be fixed. He stumbled backward away from her door, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He was broke. He was about to be homeless. And his new beautiful wife thought he was a fraud. He looked at his mother standing in the doorway of the small house that was paid for, a queen in her own small kingdom, and he realized with a terrifying clarity that she held all the power. He had nothing. His perfect life had been a house of cards, and she had just pulled out the bottom one. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation for Julian. The eviction notice on his door was not a threat. It was a promise. On the third day, as he was frantically trying to pack his expensive clothes and gadgets into boxes, the building manager arrived with a locksmith. Julian was forced to leave his apartment, his possessions piled on the sidewalk like a monument to his failure. People walked by, staring at the man in the designer suit, standing next to a mountain of belongings with nowhere to go. His first call was to Victoria. He pleaded with her, his voice cracking. Please, Victoria, let me come stay with you and your parents for a little while, just until I get back on my feet. Her reply was cold and final. My parents were not impressed with what happened on our honeymoon, Julian. And they are certainly not impressed that you've been evicted. My father said, and I quote, I will not have a man who lives off his mother's charity sleeping under my roof. I think it's best if we don't see each other for a while. She hung up. A few days later, a letter from her lawyer arrived at his office. She was filing for an annulment. Their perfect marriage had lasted less than 2 weeks. He tried to get a loan from the bank, but without his mother's financial history to back him up, his own income was not enough to secure the amount he needed. He was rejected. His co-workers, who he had always tried to impress with his expensive lunches and stories of his success, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and scorn. The news of his sudden downfall spread through the office like a bad smell. He was no longer the confident rising star. He was a joke. Swallowing his pride, he called his friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at his wedding. One by one, they made excuses. Sorry, man. My spare room is full. Now's not a good time. I've got family visiting. You should have thought about that before you treated your mother that way. The story of why he was in this mess had traveled faster than he had. No one wanted to help the man who had disowned his own mother. He ended up selling his fancy car for a fraction of what it was worth just to have some cash. He sold his expensive watches and designer suits at a pawn shop. He moved into a tiny, run-down room in a boarding house on the worst side of town. The room was small and smelled of damp and despair. At night, he could hear sirens and shouting from the street below. He would lie awake on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, thinking of his clean, spacious apartment, his beautiful wife, and the comfortable life he had thrown away. He had to take on a second job, washing dishes at a diner late at night just to make enough money to eat. His hands, once soft and smooth, became red and raw from the hot water and harsh soap. His back ached constantly. He was always tired. He was living the life his mother had lived for decades. And he finally understood what it meant. He finally understood the exhaustion in her bones, the calluses on her hands. One evening after a grueling shift, he found himself walking in his old neighborhood. He didn't know why, but his feet had carried him there. He stood across the street from his mother's house. The lights were on. Through the window, he could see her sitting in her armchair reading a book. The house looked warm and safe, an island of peace in a world that had become a nightmare for him. A deep, aching regret filled his heart. It was a pain far worse than being broke or homeless. It was the pain of knowing he had wounded the one person in the world who had ever truly loved him. He thought of her face, the face he had called ugly. He remembered the story of the fire, a story she had told him when he was a little boy, a story he had completely forgotten. He remembered tracing the scar on her cheek with his little finger and telling her she was his hero. How had he become this person, this cruel, ungrateful stranger? Tears streamed down his face. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of profound shame. He wanted to run across the street to fall on his knees and beg for her forgiveness, but he couldn't. What could he possibly say? What apology could ever be enough? He knew he didn't deserve her forgiveness. He had to earn it. He turned and walked away. The next day, he quit his high-paying office job. He knew he couldn't stand being in that place, pretending to be someone he wasn't. He got a job with a construction crew, doing hard physical labor. It was backbreaking work, but it was honest. Every dollar he earned felt real. He saved every penny he could. He lived in his tiny room, ate cheap food, and worked. Months went by. He paid back the restaurant from his honeymoon. He slowly started to rebuild his life. Not the fancy life he had before, but a real one that was entirely his own. One Saturday afternoon, almost a year after the wedding, he walked to his mother's house again. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing simple, clean work clothes. His hands were calloused now, like hers. He was thinner, and there were new lines of exhaustion on his face, but his eyes were clear. He knocked on the door. Eleanor opened it.